For a lot of fans, analysts, and good old YouTube content creators, the Israel Adesanya hating season has been upon us for quite some time. And to be honest, for as much as Izzy definitely has a personality and even a fighting style that's going to split people down the middle, I was interested to take this downtime in his career and see just how highly his run as champion, and his run in the UFC overall, deserves to be rated. Personally, I found the dude increasingly difficult to root for on a personal level, or basically, as far as my oft-cited Irish system of judgment is concerned, I wouldn't go for a pint with him. But I've never been annoyed by his fighting style, nor do I ever really get too angry at fighters when they turn in quote-unquote boring performances in high-risk matchups or title fights at anything. Now, I obviously prefer to watch a good old scrap or a more determined display of dominance, but I think this sport is just far too dangerous for me to realistically go out of my way to take shots at someone for a boring fight, or for the limitations of their skill set. Sometimes you get great fights, and sometimes you don't. And I guess I've worked in this sport for long enough and interviewed enough fighters who are on the rise to feel a little differently about things as time goes on. So I do think that looking at Izzy's resume at this stage in particular will be an interesting exercise, because at this time, though we do know he is elite, we also now consider him to be very, very human. I mean, we've watched this guy lose 3 times in his last 7, and that'll certainly bring you back down to earth. But I do think that this period of a former champion's career, right after they lose the belt, is the stage where their stock tends to take a major hit. The loss of the title is still fresh in the mind, the rebound has yet to be attempted, and enough time hasn't really passed for us to look back on their title reign with a different perspective or fresh eyes. For Izzy, I would say that the main thing working against him now are those decisions that could have gone the other way. In fact, he's kind of had a mixed bag of performances. If I were to even place Adesanya's 13 fights since he stepped in there with Derek Brunson at the top 10 level, it would be laid out as follows. Category 1 would be the blowouts. His finishes are highly impressive performances that just aren't in any doubt. I would put his wins over Derek Brunson, Robert Whittaker in their first fight, Paulo Costa, and his finish of Alex Pereira in their rematch. Category 2 would be fights that he won, but not in an incredibly inspired or dominant fashion. His title defenses against Marvin Vettori and Jared Cannonier spring to mind. Like, I know those fights were dominant, but you know what I mean. I would also put that contender fight against Anderson Silva, which just really lacked intensity. And in this case, for the sake of the categories, I'm going to cite his fight with Kelvin Gastelum, which was an incredibly inspired performance that he definitely won through his heroics in round 5. But it was also a very, very tight fight that saw him tested to extreme lengths by a 5'9" natural welterweight who managed to stun him bad with a head kick and make it one of the year's best fights. I'm not saying it wasn't an amazing contest, because it was, but it doesn't get in Category 1, it's a Category 2 win. Not dominant, but impressive nonetheless. Category 3 is for fights that could have been judged against him. The rematch with Robert Whittaker, and of course the lackluster pay-per-view main event that was the Yoel Romero fight. These are the ones that could have gone his way, but you could also very easily see for his opponent. And then for Category 4, I'm going to put his 3 losses here, despite the fact that they were very different in their nature. There was the decently competitive but clear defeat to Jan Blachowicz at 205, that legendary comeback finish in the 5th round that Alex Pereira used to win the belt, and then the shock of the year, a totally dominant defeat at the hands of Sean Strickland. So from his UFC 230 pay-per-view debut to his most recent fight, and I will point out that he's an incredibly active fighter, Izzy has had a very mixed bag of results. 13 fights, 12 of which at 185 pounds, 1 at 205, with 4 fights falling in Category 1, 4 fights in Category 2, 2 fights in Category 3, and then his 3 losses in Category 4. It's kind of a funky way of saying that Israel Adesanya has only really had 4 amazing clean performances in 13 fights, and only 3 of them were at the championship level. The other was against Derek Brunson. But I think despite this data, Adesanya is still a very, very good fighter. Perhaps a misunderstood fighter, or a mismarketed fighter. And as this video goes on, I will do my best to place him within the all-time GOAT list, if I were to assume that he just retired, viewing his body of work as complete. But looking at his future, I do think that he has the potential to turn it all around. I just see the Category 2 fights though. You know, those fights that didn't set the world on fire, and I just think how much better Izzy's record would have looked if he'd styled on the likes of Cannonier, Vettori, and even to a lesser extent Anderson Silva. During the title reign of Israel Adesanya, I see a guy who deserves some degree of respect for his risk management and how that benefits from the fact that he very clearly doesn't care about what his haters think. For as much as the man gets a hard time for being a little cocky and difficult to bear on the mic, I think there's a competitive humility there, because he has been knocked out before, back when he was in kickboxing, and I think that his approach to fighting comes with a degree of professionalism, making it a bit of a double-edged sword. The man defended a UFC title 5 times, which is an incredibly difficult feat to accomplish, but would he have emerged as a different type of champion, or even a longer-serving champion, had he fought with a little more electricity to his game? His performance against Jan Blachowicz didn't display the type of urgency, and that's the key word here, urgency, of a man making a shot at double championship glory. And you could argue that his loss against Poatan at UFC 281 was possibly linked to the fact that he didn't turn up the heat and go for it a bit more, especially after he very badly rocked Pereira early on. He kind of just let his opponent hang around for a few more rounds and ended up shortening his own odds. And even as his title was being taken from him clearly by Strickland, despite all of the good work Sean was doing in every facet of the fight, both offensively and especially defensively, Izzy just didn't have that extra gear. And I think that's a very clear limitation of his. It's either a desire to manage risk, to avoid damage, or just a consequence of an overly cerebral approach to fighting. But while it worked for him consistently before, the cracks are definitely showing, and now the numbers are starting to back it up. And those cracks are not only or even necessarily in his skill set, but I think it's his overall approach to this game. Right now, Israel is definitely a top 25, maybe even top 20 all-time fighter. His title reign gets him that. But he is most certainly in a make or break period as far as pushing himself even further beyond that fringe position outside of the top 15 goes. And there's also the danger that he could slip into a greater level of obscurity within the GOAT race. So is his career overrated? Well, I don't think so, because it's not difficult to break down, or it's not difficult to rate his career, to get an exact fix on where he stands in relation to his contemporaries, or within the grander MMA history books. Anyway, that'll just about do it for this video. But what do you think of Israel Adesanya's career overall, and in particular, his recent form and the strength of his title reign as a whole? And if he were to retire tomorrow, where would that leave him in the GOAT conversation? Top 30? Top 20? Where do you think he fits in? Be sure to let us know in the comment section below, and if you want to like the video and subscribe, that would be awesome. As always, thank you for watching.